Let's give a lovely applause for those who have made this possible, the White family. Let's give them a lovely applause. We're going to be talking more about that particular tree here in a moment. But before we do that, we want to open up with a prayer. I'm going to ask the brother Isaac White, if he doesn't mind leading us in the opening prayer.
That's great. Father, thank you for this opportunity to come out, tell us our portion of your word, Father, for giving everybody life this morning. Bless us to hear a portion of your word. Thank you for Brother Jackson. Thank you for his example, his willingness to serve you, Father, bring your word to us through his teaching. Father, thank you for helping us discover our purpose. We don't always have a purpose. We know peace and one forward, form for the foundation of the earth. We know we have a purpose in life. Father, help us to discover that, get even fulfill it, Father. Thank you for all those who are here this morning. That's from the apostle, Father. Thank you for your son down for us our sins.
Amen. Thank you. We're going to have Brother Meadows lead us in a verse of the song this morning.
Please stand with me at this time. Basis, please help me out. Our God is an awesome God. He reigns from heaven above with some power and love. Our God is an awesome God. Our God is an awesome God. He reigns from heaven above with wisdom, power, and love. Our God. Come on, it's a God. Our God is an awesome God. He reigns from heaven above with wisdom, power, and love. Our God is an awesome God. He reigns from heaven above with wisdom, power, and love. Oh Lord, our God. He reigns from heaven above. Yeah, yeah, yeah. To His power,
Our God is truly an awesome God. And He does, in fact, reign forever and ever. That is really a good interlude into our class on this morning. As we mentioned this morning, we're so grateful for those who have actually taken the initiative, inspired enough to help our experience in learning to become more impactful. As you came into the room this morning, you saw that each group had individual key lime cakes made for them, and we had coffee made. And there is a rationale and a reason behind that this morning. As you all know, we have been studying our last couple of lessons. We are discovering how that discovering the good in all things is critically important when it comes to helping us to discover God's purpose in our life. And so the key lime cake came from the Whites, husband and wife, actually after one of our classes. They began to actually kind of think about the lesson that was trying to be communicated. And they took it upon them, so they got with me, and then they kind of shared kind of an idea that they had. And so I'm going to let Sister White come this morning. And we've been talking about, again, learning this principle that the Bible talks about, and the author in his book, and we're going to be looking at the details of that this morning. How important and why it's important when it comes to Christians, us as living the Christian life, why it is critically important for us to begin to develop the mindset of discovering the good in all things. And what does key lime cake have to do with having the ability to being able to discover the good in all things? Sister White, you can, if you come. Actually, Brother Bailey, can we get the camera on her? Okay.
Well, thank you for the opportunity, and I'm glad that everybody's enjoying dessert. One of my love languages is sweet dessert, and so I hope y'all feel the love. I do. Just in the, because of course, until last Sunday, I certainly didn't know that Brother Jackson was thinking of that recipe type concept to illustrate this message, but this is something that comes up in our household frequently. One of the things that I'm working with our youngest son on, he's interested in some culinary art type things, and so we have discussions about recipes and ingredients very often. And so, frequently when I'm making something and he's joining me in the kitchen, sometimes he's very surprised at some of the ingredients that might be incorporated in something that he likes quite a bit, because there may be an ingredient or two that he would never want, or he didn't think he liked, or he thought he might have been allergic to, or whatever, or he thought it was gross, and he didn't know that was an ingredient, something that was a favorite thing of his. So when Brother Jackson was talking about that last week, it really impacted us, and so we and I talked about just different facets of ingredients and how things individually we might not appreciate, but we appreciate the finished product. And so, and then also talking about things out of order. When you combine things in incorrect order, and that's kind of like we talked about last week, it doesn't give you the results you want. So you really have to follow God's order in our lives. So we might think that it's okay for us to, have our own plan and have things in the order that we think will be most comfortable for us, but that's not going to give us the finished product. We'll have a product, but it won't be like we want it to be. It won't have the texture we want it to have. It won't have the taste that we want it to have. So, like, say for instance, there has been a time when I've left the ingredients out, and I've said to my youngest son, hey, I'm getting ready to go and do this. Go ahead and start and do this. But perhaps because of the headphones, or because of the age, or because of the different, because of the personality, there might have been a tendency to just say, well, we'll just take all this stuff and put it in the KitchenAid and just turn the KitchenAid on, and we'll just put it in the oven and see how that works out. Instead of looking at the paper that I left to say, this is the order, and this is how things have to be done. And so I really just felt like, in so many ways, recipes is a great indication, a great parallel example of how knowing that all things work together for good, but that they have to work together in the way that God orchestrates, in the same way that recipes have to work together the way that whoever designed the recipe intended for it to be. Because, like you were talking about last week, one thing that really hit me hard was that God sees the end product first. He knows what the end product is first. The same way that master bakers that come up with recipes, they see the end product first. And that's how they design the recipes and the amounts and the order.
Let's give her another part. This is a good job. This is a great object lesson, really, to actually tie into a number of the principles that we've already talked about. We began by talking about when it comes to God's understanding God's purpose and defining purpose. Purpose is always God's original what? Intent and his what? End result. And when God created all things, we do know that when God creates anything, he always finishes before he what? Starts. So he begins always with the end in mind. And so this particular exercise really ties in to help us understand this particular Bible verse in its proper context. Romans 8:28 when the Bible says, and we know that in all things, God works for the good of those who love him and who have been called according to his purpose. All of us, those of us who are interested in pursuing the purposes of God, must understand these particular principles in this verse. And the first thing is, there's something that we all must know. And we talked about this Wednesday. And we all must know that what? In all things. Not that all things are necessarily good, but that in all things, God is at work. We have to get to a point to where and again, this is for those who do what? Love him. This won't make sense. This principle, you won't submit yourself to this principle if in fact you don't get to a place in your relationship with God that you really love him. This is for those who love him. And we talked about on Wednesday, the real measure of our love in any relationship is trust. You get to a point to where you trust God. And what is it that you trust God in? You trust him in all things. You trust him in all things. Not just the good things, but in all things. And I can trust him because I know that he's working. He's working. And see, what the propensity is, when things are going well in our life, the propensity is, God is with me. But on the other hand, when things are not going according to the way that I would like them to go, all of a sudden I question the notion of whether or not God is present. Where are you, Lord? Where are you, God? Well, he's somewhere in the Bible between Genesis and Revelation, Jesus made this statement. He says, and lo, I am with you always. I am with you always. And so, if I was to ask, and that's why the key lime cake is such a great object lesson. You know, we just experienced eating key lime cake. But in the eating of the key lime cake, this is also true in terms of what you have just experienced. You've just experienced eating flour. You've just experienced eating butter. You've also just experienced eating raw eggs. You've just experienced eating key lime juice. You've just experienced eating orange juice. Now, all of these were ingredients that were necessary to make the cake that we just got to eat. Now, if you were to have experienced eating any one of those ingredients isolated in and of themselves, what kind of experience would that have been? For instance, if we sat on the table, we had all of the ingredients, not in its finished product form, but in this individual form, when we asked each one of you to actually take, just say the flour and eat it, the flour alone, and you ate the flour, isolated from the rest of the process, what kind of experience would you have had? It's been a horrible, horrible experience, right? I've learned with some people, some people really love, flour. It reminds me of a kid when we used to go to school, and I'm talking about paste. We used to, before there was glue, there was actually hard paste, and the paste kind of smelled good, And I remember as kids actually kind of eating the paste. But anyway, that's another thing. My point is, you'd be surprised at what some people enjoy and what some people like and some people don't. But for the most part, if you were to eat the flour by itself, it would not be a pleasurable experience. And then, but on the other hand, part of the ingredients to make up that cake is orange juice. Now, if you were to drink the orange juice isolated by itself, what kind of experience would that be? That'd be a good experience. I mean, it would be a great experience for most. unless you have some type of allergic reaction to orange juice. But what's your point, Brother Jackson? What I'm saying is, in this finished product that we've all enjoyed, for the most part, is the good and the bad. It's the good and the bad. God works. This is the thing that we got to know. That in all things, not all things, we can't get blown out of the water when things that happen that are difficult in our lives. And allow those things to separate us in regards to our relationship and walk with God. Because in doing so, what we will end up doing is we could end up thwarting the purpose of God. Because all of us are on this journey, in this class, of discovering what our lifelong purpose is. And part of actually coming to that understanding is knowing we got to know that in all things, God is working things together for the fulfillment of his purpose in our lives. Everybody get that? And so we introduced an exercise Wednesday to help us begin to actually develop a kind of mindset on a regular basis to begin to, on every day that we live, to learn how to discover the good in all things. Amen. And so we began a process of what we're calling making nightly love deposits. Nightly love deposits. That is becoming regular and looking at each day and assessing the good out of that day. Because what typically happens is we compartmentalize things in our lives. We have a tendency to focus on the withdrawals and totally miss the deposits that God has actually allowed us to experience. And that's what we'll focus on, the two or three wrong things that may be occurring at that particular point in our life, and the total neglect of all the good that God has actually made available to us. And so God gives us a principle. The author talks about, Paul over in Romans talks about, do not be overcome with evil, but overcome the evil with what? Good. God, part of his nature is that he is constantly in the process of doing two things that we talked about. He's in the process of doing two things that happen as a result of the fall. We know God's original intent and his end result in the fall when he created man, when he created you and I. We now know that we were created in eternity and born into what? We are what? What's our true identity? We are what? Spirit. When were you created in spirit? Huh? Before the foundation in the world. It was in the mind of God what your purpose would be when he decided that you would be born. He already has in mind the key lime cake that your life is to be. We are like the chef. We are the recipe. Our lives represent the recipe of God. He already knows what he's looking for. And all of the ingredients being our daily lives, are all in the process, God working in our life to fulfill that purpose. So in the beginning, after Adam fell, God has been in the process over time, over history, reconciling and restoring. I would write that down again. I mentioned it 2 or 3 times. Reconciling and restoring. This is how you can actually make sense out of your life. God is in the process of reconciling and restoring. us back to our original creation when he created us. He's reconciling and restoring. And so part of reconciling and restoring is God takes those things, and it's all in biblical history, that look like they are a problem. And God, ultimately, when you look at the panoramic view, it always turns out for what? It always turns out for good. God's purpose. If we say that we want to fulfill God's purpose, a life of purpose is not an ordinary lifestyle. It's an extraordinary lifestyle. So we begin in our groups after Wednesday, and we're going to spend some time hearing from the groups now. Each group and the group leaders and co-leaders were to communicate within your groups, sharing the process of this nightly love deposits and talking about the good that you have experienced or the good that you are able to actually discover. The good that you are able to discover. Again, this class is a class of discovery. And so we want to hear from the various groups who engaged in the process to find out how this particular exercise among your groups have gone this week. Would you share, those who are leaders and co-leaders, would you speak on the behalf of your group to share with the rest of us how that exercise went this past week? We'll start with being that we have a mic here. This is Group Breakthrough. And guys, we are recording this information. So we want to make sure that you speak into the mic so that we can pick up the audio while you're being recorded. Group Breakthrough, how did your experience go this week?
Responses, very positive responses, and
it went pretty good. Okay, did your group find it useful and helpful in terms of sharing with each other?
Yes, because I recorded sharing the issues. Member stated that there was someone who thought that the will was against her, and mother was of an opinion, and from his showing that someone cares, kind of changed that recently.
Okay, we had one member who made the comment that they thought that the world might have been against them. And so you began to actually share among your group. And that person was able to get perspective. Okay, Brother Shelby.
Yes.
Hold on.
I think that there's a young lady that I work with out at the school out there that has come into some issues thinking that her involvement in the school, that every student or everybody that she comes in contact with at her home campus is against her, including her mom. So getting the opportunity to actually work with that individual, that child, trying to ensure her that no, there's nobody. We're here to work with you and not against you, including your mother. Your mother is the first one that's going to be working with you and not against you. And I've had the opportunity to work with that child, visit with that child, and have seen some changes in her since she's been at that campus over there. Of course, we get her for 30 days and then move on. So I'm hoping that within that time frame and some of the feedback I get from the team here, that we'll be able to make her solid, strong enough to be able to go out and face some of the issues that she's dealing with at her other campus.
Okay, now for those who don't know where Brother Shelby actually is employed, he's employed by the Abilene ISD, Independent School District, but the students that he works with are students who are challenged with extreme behavioral situations resulting from a lot of times growing up in a life environment that we would consider, what's the word that I would? Yeah, I mean, dysfunctional is not even the word. It's chaotic and highly dysfunctional. These kids are sent to this particular campus as a result of not being able to assimilate into your normal educational system. So, how stressful is your job?
It can be very stressful.
How stressful?
Maybe life-threatening.
Life-threatening stress. Now, so I want to create a context. So it's very challenging for any person who's employed at his particular campus when you come home from work every day to look for any good. I mean, how long have you been working at that campus?
This is my fourth year.
And he probably, if I was to ask him, he probably, in terms of seniority, are you probably one of the longest?
No, sir.
Okay.
No, sir. I'm fairly new to this.
Well, but there's a great deal of turnover among other staff.
Yes, sir.
Okay. You don't last typically 4 years in terms of what he's doing.
Yes.
I'm trying to get in a set of context. So what I hear him saying is he found the good, this particular young lady who had extreme behavioral kind of situations going on in her life, rather than look at her from the eyes that most people look at her, he was able to look at her life circumstances and then find the good. But not just only find the good, begin to communicate to her the good, how to begin to process things in her own life also. How to be able to go about doing the same. Y'all get that? So that's what we're talking about. God is in the process, when he created each one of us, we know his original intent, his end result, his purpose was that we might be what? The reflection of who he is on earth in our lives in terms of who he is in heaven. This young lady was introduced to God as a result of Moses' shelter. And he's helping her now process the good and helping her begin to see herself as God sees her. Let's give him another clap. All right. Okay, let's get another group who share with us. It doesn't matter. This is group Braveheart. Okay.
Hi, good morning, everyone. We have not been able to share. We were able to get information. I did both assignments, and I passed it on to our leader, Brother Sands, but he will be out of town today and for Wednesday. But we were able to.
We're still in the process of getting all our phones connected.
We haven't gotten there yet. But I shared and passed it on to Brother Sands. But we don't have good communication because this is a new phone, and I wasn't able to send it out to them, but they got it through Brother Sands individually.
Okay, thank you for bringing that up also, Sister Joseph. This is actually the first exercise in terms of after all of our groups have been the text groups have been set up on the groups. I realized that there is going to be a window of time for all of the groups to kind of get acclimated with this whole process. So I understand that. And so that's what you just got to explain. In other words, it's on two things. One, making sure that all of the groups are connected to each other. And then, once that even happens, a process of time where all of the group members begin to engage in the process. So thank you for sharing that so that we can bring that to everybody else's attention. We'll go over to group inspiration. Over here, group inspiration.
Sister Mary takes that.
Please hold the mic up.
Takes that. Her good today is being able to administer to a lady at work, and I went on to say that that's always such an amazing experience, to be able to administer to someone. And Brother Osborne because we don't know really how many great things that happen throughout a day. And we don't, sometimes we don't even sit back and just think about it, but as while we're doing this activity, I believe that we will be able to start recognizing more of the good things that we actually do for other people. We may not even realize, the good that we're doing for someone else just by, telling them about the Lord, or just maybe telling them about your good day or something good that's happened to you. And I also this week was able to share that I sponsor a young lady with substance abuse, and she called me and said good news. She's been working on getting her children back, and now she has a good visitation with them. And she was giving me all the glory, and I had to let her know God gets all the glory. So there's nothing I did, He just used me to be able to help you. So we had some good conversation.
Amen. Amen. Anybody else from that group want to respond?
I think this whole process is adjusting all of our paradigms because, like you stated when we started it, most of the time we will let 5 minutes of our day affect the rest of the 23 hours and 5 minutes that happen, as opposed to the 50 small good things that happen. For instance, I know many of us go into our workplace as the shining light or the smiling person or the one that, well, why are you so happy? It's Monday. That mindset of, oh, it's Monday, and I would say, yeah, it's Monday. You're right. It's great, man. What's wrong with you? Well, no, what's wrong with you? It's just a small shift, and some people say, man, your attitude's always pretty good. Well, I could be on the back end of this deal. You got two sides to this thing. You could be on the front end or the back end. Well, I guess that is a good way to look at it. That's the only way to look at it. But I think it just, those small little things, you don't realize it's just you being you or you living out your faith, but that will slowly shift people into those small things. And us being very deliberate and saying this is a small thing that happened. Like one of mine was, I got to make slime with my kids. Well, for me, for some people, well, that's just normal parent thing. But for me, in my background, we didn't have a whole lot of moments like that as a kid. And so getting to see that and experience that with my own kids was like, wow. So it meant a ton to me because I didn't have those kind of moments. Mm-hmm. So for somebody else, it's normal. That's all, well, they'll do it all the time. But for me, it was groundbreaking. So I'm glad we're doing this.
Okay, that's good. This group will love your father. Great. That's exactly what we're talking about. Who? Any other groups? What group are we with over here?
This is the Gold Diggers.
This is the Gold Diggers. G-O-A-L. Okay. Go right ahead, Sister Osborne.
Okay. Well, I'm the co-leader, and on behalf of my group, we need to apologize. We did not get this assignment done. But I will say that I wish that I had gotten it done because this past week was challenging for me, and I needed to focus on more positive things because some things were thrown at me. So I've committed to making sure that we started today. By Wednesday, we'll have a report.
All right. Sister?
We did have some technical issues. We had a wrong person in our feed line, and she let us know, take me off this line. And so I turned it into a deposit very quickly. I apologized to her and explained some things. And she came back and said, hey, have a blessed day. And I was able to say, hey, appreciate you, have a purposeful day. So it was turned into a deposit. But just listening to this, it's really funny. I didn't know the assignment at all, but last week when Brother Nickerson did the lesson on turning, opening your spirit and then helping others open their spirit, keep their spirit open. I took that to heart this week and kind of had this experience. And what I did was there's some people who, I knew they had closed spirits against me.